The weapons laboratory at the Nexus Military Academy buzzed with the familiar hum of energy cells charging and plasma conduits cycling through their diagnostic routines. Cadet Natasha Volkov stood at Station 7, methodically cleaning the barrel of what her classmates had taken to calling her antique. The M4A1 carbine lay disassembled on the workbench before her, its polymer stock scarred from countless operations, the metal components bearing the telltale signs of heavy use despite her meticulous maintenance. Around her, the other cadets worked with their assigned weapons, sleek energy rifles that could punch through starship hull plating, molecular disruptors that could reduce matter to its component atoms, and neural scramblers that could incapacitate an entire squad without firing a single projectile. The soft whine of charging capacitors and the occasional hiss of cooling systems created a technological symphony that had become the soundtrack to their daily weapons training. Zektar, a towering hegemony warrior whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the lab's harsh lighting, looked up from his plasma cannon with obvious disdain. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, focused on Natasha's workstation with the kind of attention one might give to a particularly interesting museum exhibit. "Tell me again, human, why you insist on carrying that relic when you could be issued proper equipment?" His question carried across the lab, drawing the attention of their fellow cadets. Ythara, whose translucent blue skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that indicated amusement, set down her sonic disruptor and glided over on her tentacle-like appendages. "I've been wondering the same thing. That projectile weapon must be at least 3 centuries behind current technology. The Academy Armory has much more sophisticated options available." Natasha didn't look up from her work, continuing to run the cleaning rod through the barrel with practiced efficiency. The familiar motions were almost meditative, something her instructors back on Earth had drilled into her until they became second nature. "It works," she said simply, her voice carrying the slight accent that marked her as coming from one of the outer colonies rather than Earth proper. A ripple of what passed for laughter among the assembled aliens filled the lab. Krexel, whose crystalline features could shift between transparency and opacity depending on his mood, flickered with barely contained mirth. "Works? My dear primitive friend, my neural disruptor can incapacitate a dozen targets simultaneously without them even knowing they've been engaged. Your chemical propulsion system can barely manage one projectile at a time. And the noise," added Thalosian, her 4 arms gesturing expressively, while her serpentine lower body coiled with what might have been embarrassment on behalf of the human. "The entire sector would know your position the moment you fired. Stealth and subtlety are the hallmarks of modern warfare, not the crude application of kinetic force." Natasha finally paused in her cleaning, her gray eyes sweeping across the gathered aliens with the kind of measured assessment that made some of them unconsciously step back. She had learned, during her first months at the academy, that being the only human in her class meant every action was scrutinized, every decision questioned. The other species had made their opinions of human capabilities quite clear during orientation: primitive, violent, technologically backward, and possessed of an alarming tendency toward what they termed emotional decision-making. "You're not wrong about the noise," she admitted, reassembling the weapon with movements so fluid they spoke of countless repetitions. The bolt carrier group slid into place with a soft click, followed by the charging handle and the buffer assembly. But sometimes you want them to know you're there. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what his species used to express confusion. "That makes no tactical sense. Why would you willingly compromise your position?" "Psychological warfare," Ythara suggested, her skin patterns shifting to a more contemplative purple, though I fail to see how a primitive projectile weapon would intimidate anyone familiar with modern combat systems. Natasha slung the rifle over her shoulder, the weight of it familiar and reassuring. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it is just sentiment." She moved toward the exit, pausing at the threshold to look back at her classmates. But this primitive weapon got me here, didn't it? The lab fell silent except for the ever-present hum of technology. Several of the cadets exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication painting a picture of mild confusion mixed with condescension. It was Krexel who finally spoke, his crystalline form flickering between states as he processed what he clearly saw as human illogic. Got you here from where exactly? Some backwater colony posting where the most dangerous threat was wildlife? Natasha's smile was small but sharp. Something like that. She left them to their speculation, knowing that her personnel file was classified at levels none of them had clearance to access. The corridor outside the weapons lab was wide enough to accommodate the various physiologies of the Academy's diverse student body, its walls lined with holographic displays showing tactical scenarios from conflicts across the known galaxy. Her boots echoed against the polished floor, a sound that had taken some getting used to after years of moving silently across terrain that couldn't afford the luxury of announced footsteps. The Academy's main concourse stretched out before her, a marvel of engineering that could house representatives from hundreds of different species in climate-controlled comfort. Atmospheric processors maintained distinct zones for methane breathers, high-pressure dwellers, and radiation-adapted species, while artificial gravity generators provided everything from Earth-normal 1G to the crushing 3G environment preferred by the rocky Therlaxians. She found herself gravitating toward one of the observation lounges, where massive transparasteel windows offered a view of the Academy's orbital position around the gas giant Nexus Prime. The planet's storm systems churned in patterns that had remained unchanged for millions of years, their hypnotic dance a reminder that some things endured regardless of the technological sophistication of those who observed them. Admiring the view, the voice belonged to Commander Voss, the Academy's chief tactical instructor and one of the few faculty members who had shown any real interest in Natasha's unconventional approach to warfare. His species, the Centaurians, were known for their analytical minds and their ability to process multiple tactical scenarios simultaneously. His elongated skull housed a brain capable of calculations that would strain most artificial intelligence systems, while his pale, almost translucent skin revealed the network of neural pathways that pulsed with thought. "Just thinking," Natasha replied, not turning from the window, "about how different everyone's definition of primitive seems to be." Commander Voss moved to stand beside her, his reflection ghostly in the transparasteel. "Your classmates have been discussing your choice of personal weapon, I take it. They think it's quaint, like carrying a sword to a plasma fight. And what do you think?" Natasha's hand moved unconsciously to the rifle's grip, her fingers tracing the worn polymer surface. "I think they've never been in a situation where technology failed them, where the power cells were drained, or the targeting computers were jammed, or the weapon's AI decided the target wasn't worth engaging." "Ah," Commander Voss said, his internal neural networks flickering with understanding. "But your weapon has no such vulnerabilities." "My weapon has one vulnerability," Natasha corrected. "Me. And I've learned to manage that particular variable." The commander's expression, if it could be called that, shifted slightly. Among his people, facial expressions were subtle things, more about the play of light through translucent skin than the movement of muscles and features. "Your psychological profile indicates exposure to extended combat operations before your enrollment here. That's unusual for someone your age. The outer colonies age you quickly. Indeed, though I notice your file is remarkably sparse on details about your service history." Natasha finally turned to face him, her gray eyes meeting his silver ones without flinching. "Is there something you need to know, Commander? Only whether you're prepared for tomorrow's field exercise, urban combat simulation, multiple hostile contacts, civilian population to consider. Your classmates will be relying on their advanced weapon systems and networked tactical support. You'll have that rifle and whatever you can carry. Will that be a problem?" Commander Voss was quiet for a long moment, his neural pathways pulsing as he considered the question from multiple angles. For you? I suspect not. For them? He paused, something that might have been amusement flickering across his features. We shall see. As he moved to leave, Natasha called after him. Commander, what do you know about my service record? He stopped but didn't turn around. Enough to know that your classmate's definition of primitive might need some adjustment. His footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the endless dance of storms below. That night, in the Spartan quarters assigned to all Academy cadets, Natasha sat on her narrow bunk and field-stripped her rifle one more time. Each component was familiar under her fingers. The bolt carrier group with its slight scoring from sand that had gotten past even the best maintenance, the buffer spring that had been replaced twice but still held tension like it was fresh from the factory, the handguard that showed wear patterns from countless hours of training and operations. But it was the small, dark stains along the upper receiver that held her attention. Most people would assume they were just discoloration from age and use, but Natasha knew better. She had tried to clean them more than once, but they seemed to have become part of the weapon itself, a permanent reminder of what it had been through and what it had done. Tomorrow, her classmates would see her primitive human weapon in action. They would learn whether their advanced technology could match simple, reliable engineering guided by experience that couldn't be programmed into any computer system. She reassembled the rifle and leaned it against the wall beside her bunk within easy reach. Old habits died hard, and some habits were worth keeping alive. The urban combat simulator occupied an entire deck of the Academy station, its holographic projectors capable of recreating any environment from the databanks of 100 different worlds. Today, it had been configured to resemble a typical colonial settlement, the kind of place where prefabricated structures met alien architecture in an uneasy fusion of necessity and adaptation. The artificial sun cast harsh shadows between buildings, while atmospheric processors created the kind of thin, recycled air that tasted of metal and human desperation. Natasha crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a civilian transport, her rifle held at the ready, while she studied the tactical display on her wrist communicator. The exercise parameters were straightforward enough. Hostile forces had taken control of the settlement's central administrative complex and were holding an unknown number of civilian hostages. The cadet squad was tasked with neutralizing the threat while minimizing civilian casualties, a scenario that played out regularly across the frontier colonies. Around her, the other members of her squad prepared their equipment with the kind of methodical precision that the Academy drilled into all its students. Zektar's plasma cannon hummed with contained energy, its targeting laser painting brief red dots on potential cover positions as he ran through his pre-combat checks. Ythara's sonic disruptor remained silent, but the subtle vibrations it generated made dust particles dance in complex patterns around her position. Tactical assessment complete, announced Krexel, his crystalline form partially transparent as he processed data streams from multiple sensor inputs. 15 hostile contacts confirmed, positions marked on your displays. Estimated civilian count ranges from 20 to 30 individuals, located primarily in the administrative center's lower levels. Squad leader Thane Moore, a reptilian Vorthan whose scaled hide could shift colors to match his surroundings, studied the tactical display with eyes that could process light spectra well beyond human range. Standard breach protocol will be followed. Zektar takes point with heavy weapon support. Ythara provides area denial. Krexel maintains overwatch with sensor coordination. Thalosian, you're our medic and secondary breach support. He paused, his gaze settling on Natasha with what might have been resignation. Human, you'll provide. Whatever it is you provide. The casual dismissal might have stung someone less experienced, but Natasha had learned to let such comments pass without reaction. Leadership was often a matter of managing personalities rather than tactics, and her squad leader was still learning how to integrate what he clearly saw as a wildcard element into his carefully structured plans. "Understood," she replied simply, checking her weapon's condition one more time. The familiar weight of the rifle in her hands was reassuring in a way that no amount of advanced technology could match. The squad moved out in standard formation, their movement coordinated through tactical networks that shared real-time positional data, threat assessments, and communication protocols. Natasha found herself automatically adapting to their pace while maintaining her own situational awareness, something that required conscious effort when surrounded by beings whose sensory capabilities far exceeded baseline human norms. The settlement's outer perimeter showed signs of hasty abandonment, personal belongings scattered in doorways, vehicles left running, the kind of chaos that spoke of people fleeing in genuine fear rather than following evacuation procedures. The holographic simulation was sophisticated enough to include ambient details like the acrid smell of burned electronics and the distant sound of structural damage settling, creating an environment that felt authentically dangerous rather than artificially constructed. "First contact in 30 meters, Krexel reported, his sensor readings painting detailed threat maps on their shared tactical display. 3 hostiles, elevated positions, energy weapons detected. Thanemore's scales shifted to match the mottled gray of the surrounding rubble. Standard suppression protocol. Zektar, lay down covering fire. Yathara, area denial on the flanking positions. Everyone else, advance by bounds until we're in effective range." The plan unfolded with textbook precision. Zektar's plasma cannon sent coherent energy bursts slamming into defensive positions, turning cover into molten slag, while Yathara's sonic disruptor created fields of disorienting acoustic interference. The hostile positions responded with return fire, their own energy weapons painting the air with deadly light as the tactical situation developed according to established patterns. Natasha found herself assigned to the rear of the formation, ostensibly providing security against flanking maneuvers, but effectively sidelined from the primary engagement. She watched her squadmates work through their tactical drill with professional competence, their advanced weapon systems and networked coordination allowing them to maintain fire superiority despite being outnumbered. The first indication that something was wrong came from Krexel's sensor readings. His crystalline form flickered with confusion as data streams conflicted with visual confirmation. Anomalous readings detected, sensor ghost contacts appearing in multiple locations, but visual confirmation is negative. Electronic warfare countermeasures, Thanemore decided, his tactical training providing a reasonable explanation for the sensor anomalies. Hostile forces are attempting to spoof our targeting systems. Switch to manual acquisition protocols, and maintain visual contact with confirmed targets. But the anomalies multiplied, and what had begun as minor sensor ghosts became a cascade of false positives that rendered their sophisticated targeting systems worse than useless. Weapons that depended on computer-assisted tracking found themselves engaging empty air while actual threats maneuvered into more advantageous positions. "I'm losing targeting lock," Zektar reported, frustration evident in the rapid clicking of his mandibles. "System keeps painting false targets and ignoring confirmed hostiles. Sonic disruptor is experiencing harmonic interference," Yathara added, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated technical distress. "Something is generating acoustic countermeasures across multiple frequency ranges." The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as their technological advantages turned into liabilities. Weapon systems that had seemed overwhelmingly superior minutes earlier now struggled to engage targets that appeared to have anticipated every aspect of their capabilities. The squad found themselves pinned down by hostile fire while their own responses became increasingly ineffective. "This is impossible," Thanemore hissed, his scales cycling through stress colors as he tried to maintain command cohesion. No colonial insurgent force should have access to this level of electronic warfare capability. It was then that Natasha made her move, rising from her position behind the transport wreckage with fluid grace. The hostile fire that had been suppressing her squad mates shifted toward this new threat, energy bolts scorching the air around her as she advanced at a steady walk. Her rifle came up to her shoulder with practiced ease, the iron sights aligning on targets that her squad mates' computers couldn't seem to locate. The first shot took a hostile sniper through center mass, the 5.56 NATO round, punching through whatever body armor the simulation had provided with brutal efficiency. The crack of the rifle echoed off the surrounding buildings, a sound so alien in this environment of energy weapons that it seemed to come from another era entirely. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, each one finding its mark, while the supposed primitive weapon proved immune to the electronic warfare measures that had rendered her squad mates' equipment useless. No targeting computers to confuse, no networked systems to spoof, just human eyes, steady hands, and the kind of marksmanship that came from experience rather than technology. "How is she doing that?" Zektar demanded, his compound eyes tracking Natasha's movement as she bounded between cover positions with tactical precision that belonged in advanced infantry manuals. "Her weapon has no targeting assistance, no ballistic computer, no threat assessment system." "She doesn't need them," Krexel replied, his sensor readings finally beginning to make sense as he observed the human's unconventional approach to the tactical problem. "Her weapon system is entirely analog, no electronic components for the hostiles to interfere with." Natasha reached the building's entrance and paused, pressing herself against the wall while she assessed the interior through the partially open doorway. The hostile forces inside would be expecting her squad mates' energy weapons and high-tech tactical approaches. They would not be prepared for someone who fought like their ancestors had, relying on fieldcraft and marksmanship rather than technological superiority. She could hear movement inside, the soft whisper of footsteps on debris-covered floors, the barely audible hum of energy weapon power cells cycling through firing sequences, the kind of ambient noise that spoke of people trying very hard to remain silent while maintaining combat readiness. The interior of the administrative building stretched before Natasha like a three-dimensional puzzle of cover, concealment, and potential ambush sites. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, while the building's automated systems sparked intermittently from what appeared to be combat damage. The air tasted of ozone and melted metal, familiar flavors from too many similar environments to count. Behind her, she could hear her squad mates attempting to restore function to their compromised systems, their frustrated communications a constant background chatter that would have been amusing under different circumstances. Advanced weapons designed to function flawlessly across hundreds of different environments had been reduced to expensive clubs by enemies who understood their technological dependencies better than their users did. Natasha moved through the building's ground floor with the kind of deliberate precision that comes from understanding how sound travels through damaged structures, where shadows provide genuine concealment rather than false security, and which angles of approach minimize exposure to potential threats. Her rifle tracked her line of sight, always ready but never hurried, the weapon's mechanical simplicity a stark contrast to the sophisticated systems that currently lay useless outside. The first floor yielded 3 more hostile contacts, each engagement brief and decisive. The crack of rifle fire echoed through the building's corridors with a finality that energy weapons somehow lacked, their whisper-quiet discharges failing to convey the same sense of lethal intent. Each target dropped cleanly, the simulation's damage algorithms recognizing hits that would have been instantly fatal regardless of the weapon's apparent technological limitations. It was on the second floor that she found the first civilian. The holographic projection showed a young Thoraxian family, mother, father, and 2 offspring, huddled behind an overturned desk in what had once been a records office. Their violet skin had paled to almost white with fear, while their gill slits fluttered in the rapid breathing patterns that indicated extreme distress. "Human soldier," the father whispered in accented standard, his large eyes tracking the rifle in Natasha's hands with obvious terror. "Please, We are not combatants, our children. I know, Natasha replied softly, lowering her weapon to a less threatening position. I'm here to get you out. How many hostiles are between here and the exit? 6, maybe 7, the mother replied, her voice tight with the kind of control that comes from refusing to panic in front of one's children. They came through perhaps 20 minutes ago, heading for the upper floors. They said, she paused, glancing at her offspring before continuing. They said they were going to make examples. Natasha's expression hardened slightly, though her voice remained calm. Stay here. Stay quiet. I'll be back for you. The upper floors proved to be where the real tactical challenge lay. The hostile forces had established overlapping fields of fire that turned the building's central stairwell into a killing field, while their elevated positions provided clear sight lines to any conventional approach routes. It was exactly the kind of defensive setup that advanced weapon systems were designed to overcome, using network targeting to coordinate simultaneous engagements, while energy weapons eliminated cover through brute force application. But those systems were currently useless, leaving the tactical problem to be solved through more fundamental approaches to combat. Natasha found herself drawing on lessons learned in environments where technology was a luxury rather than a necessity, where survival depended on understanding terrain better than your enemies and using their expectations against them. The building's maintenance shafts provided an alternative route to the upper floors, though navigating them required the kind of physical conditioning that not all species possessed. Her human anatomy, evolved for persistence hunting across varied terrain, proved unexpectedly advantageous in the cramped confines of service tunnels that had been designed for automated maintenance systems rather than living beings. She emerged on the 4th floor behind the hostile positions, their attention focused downward toward approaches they expected rather than threats that materialized from directions they hadn't considered. The engagement was brief and devastating. 5 targets eliminated in as many seconds, their sophisticated weapons never even brought to bear, as ancient lessons in violence assertion proved more decisive than technological superiority. It was in the final room that she found the source of the electronic warfare measures that had neutralized her squad mates' equipment. The device was clearly of advanced manufacture, its alien components working in harmony to generate interference patterns across multiple electromagnetic spectra simultaneously. A small technical miracle that represented the cutting edge of battlefield technology, operated by beings who understood its capabilities better than most military engineers. But it was also plugged into the building's power grid, dependent on infrastructure that could be disrupted through simpler means. A single rifle shot through the device's primary power coupling sent cascades of sparks across the room, while electromagnetic interference dropped to negligible levels throughout the building. Volkov to squad leader, Natasha reported through her communicator, the first time she had used the tactical network since the exercise began. Building secure, civilians safe, hostile electronic warfare capabilities neutralized. You should have full system functionality restored. The response came after a pause that spoke of considerable surprise. Confirmed. Systems coming back online. How did you... Another pause. Never mind. Excellent work, Cadet. She made her way back down through the building to collect the Thoraxian family, finding them exactly where she had left them, but considerably more relaxed. The sound of hostile weapons fire had ended, replaced by the familiar chatter of her squad mates coordinating their advance through the building's lower floors. Is it over? The father asked, his skin beginning to show hints of its normal coloration as stress chemicals faded from his system. It's over, Natasha confirmed, shouldering her rifle. My squad mates will escort you to the safe zone. As if summoned by her words, Zektar's imposing form appeared in the doorway, his plasma cannon now functioning normally and painting targeting references across potential threat vectors. His compound eyes fixed on Natasha with something that might have been reassessment. How did you do that? He asked without preamble. How did you complete the mission objectives when our superior weapon systems were completely neutralized? Natasha helped the youngest Thoraxian offspring to its feet, noting how the child's fear had transformed into the kind of wide-eyed curiosity that transcended species boundaries. "Different problems require different tools," she replied. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one." "But your weapon," Yathara's voice carried a note of confusion as her bioluminescent patterns shifted through colors that indicated cognitive dissonance. "It's centuries behind our technology. How can it be more effective than systems designed specifically for these scenarios?" "Because," Natasha said, leading the family toward the exit, "it doesn't depend on anything except the person using it. No power cells to drain, no targeting computers to fool, no networked systems to compromise. Just basic physics and someone who knows how to apply them." The debrief took place in the Academy's Tactical Analysis Center, where holographic displays replayed the exercise from multiple angles while performance metrics scrolled past in streams of data that painted detailed pictures of individual and team effectiveness. The assembled cadets watched in silence as Natasha's portion of the mission unfolded. Her methodical advance through the building contrasted sharply with their own struggles to adapt to technological failure. Commander Voss presided over the session with the kind of analytical detachment his species was known for, though Natasha thought she detected hints of something that might have been satisfaction in his expression. "Comments on cadet performance?" he asked the assembled group. Thanemore spoke first, his scales cycling through neutral colors that indicated professional assessment rather than personal opinion. The human's approach was effective, though I question whether such primitive methods would prove successful against more sophisticated opponents. "Primitive methods," Commander Voss repeated, his neural pathways flickering with interest. "Please elaborate." "Well," Thanemore gestured toward the tactical display where Natasha's rifle was highlighted in comparison to their energy weapons. "No targeting assistance, no penetration enhancement, no area effect capabilities. It's essentially unchanged from weapons used centuries ago." "I see. And this primitive weapon accomplished what your advanced systems could not?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, its implications clear to everyone in the room. Krexel shifted uncomfortably, his crystalline form flickering between states as he processed the logical contradiction inherent in their assumptions. "The electronic warfare capabilities were unexpected," he offered. "Our systems are designed to operate in environments with sophisticated countermeasures, but the specific interference patterns used in this scenario were unusual." "Were they?" Commander Voss called up additional data streams, showing electromagnetic signatures from the exercise. "Analysis indicates standard military-grade electronic warfare packages, readily available through commercial markets and widely used by insurgent forces across the frontier regions. Nothing particularly sophisticated or unexpected." The silence stretched longer this time, punctuated only by the soft hum of the tactical center's environmental systems and the occasional flicker of data streams updating their displays. It was Yathara who finally voiced what several of them were beginning to understand. "Her weapon wasn't affected because it doesn't rely on the systems that were being targeted," she said, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated grudging acceptance of an unwelcome truth. "It's not primitive. It's immune." "An interesting perspective," Commander Voss agreed. "Cadet Volkov, would you care to share your thoughts on the exercise?" Natasha stood before the assembled group, her rifle still slung across her shoulder despite the exercise having concluded. The weapon seemed to draw attention even in the sterile environment of the Tactical Analysis Center, its worn polymer and scarred metal surfaces speaking of experience that the pristine Academy equipment lacked. "You want to know why I carry this instead of accepting something more advanced," she began, her gray eyes sweeping across the faces of her classmates. "You think it's stubbornness or nostalgia or some primitive human attachment to obsolete technology?" She unslung the rifle and held it horizontally, displaying it for the group's examination. "This weapon has been with me for 3 years. 3 years of operations across 17 different colony worlds, in environments ranging from Arctic wasteland to methane-rich swampland to irradiated urban ruins. It has never failed me when failure would have meant death. Zektar's mandibles clicked with what might have been skepticism. Surely modern weapons would have been more effective in such diverse conditions. Environmental adaptation algorithms alone would provide significant advantages. Would they? Natasha's smile was sharp. Tell me, how long does it take your plasma cannon to cycle through startup procedures when you activate it from cold storage? Approximately 47 seconds for full operational readiness, Zektar replied automatically, then paused as he began to understand the implication of the question. This weapon is ready to fire in the time it takes me to shoulder it and acquire a target, perhaps 2 seconds if I'm being careful. She demonstrated the movement with fluid precision, the rifle coming to her shoulder while her eye found the sight picture in one smooth motion. When you're ambushed in the middle of the night by hostiles who don't wait for your equipment to boot up, 2 seconds versus 47 seconds is the difference between living and dying. Thalosian's 4 arms gestured in patterns that indicated consideration of new information. But surely the superior firepower and range of modern weapons compensate for minor delays in activation time. Superior firepower? Natasha's laugh held no humor. This rifle fires a 62-grain projectile at approximately 3,000 feet per second. The kinetic energy transferred to the target is more than sufficient to neutralize any biological threat I've encountered. How much more firepower do you need to stop someone who's trying to kill you? She moved to one of the holographic displays and called up ballistic data, showing penetration statistics and wound channel analysis with the kind of clinical detachment that spoke of professional familiarity with the subject. Your plasma cannon can vaporize a vehicle. My rifle can kill the person inside that vehicle without damaging anything else in the area. Which one is more useful when civilian casualties are a consideration? Commander Voss stepped forward, his neural pathways pulsing with what Natasha had learned to recognize as approval. An excellent point. Range considerations? Effective range of 500 meters for point targets, 800 meters for area targets, assuming standard atmospheric conditions, Natasha replied. Iron sights, no electronic assistance required. Your weapons? Krexel's form flickered as he accessed specifications for his neural disruptor. Optimal range of 150 meters, degrading significantly beyond 200 meters due to atmospheric interference patterns. Requires clear line of sight and electromagnetic targeting lock. So my primitive weapon has more than twice your effective range, requires no external power source, and can engage targets in any environment where I can see them clearly enough to aim. Natasha's voice carried the kind of patience one might use when explaining basic concepts to children. Tell me again how your advanced technology represents an improvement. The tactical center fell silent, except for the background hum of electronics and the soft whisper of environmental systems. Several of the cadets were examining the technical specifications displayed on their personal screens, comparing the capabilities they had assumed were superior with the reality of what those capabilities actually meant in practical application. It was Yathara who broke the silence, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that indicated careful thought. Your ammunition supply is limited, though. My sonic disruptor can generate coherent acoustic pulses indefinitely as long as power is available. True, Natasha conceded, patting the magazine pouches on her tactical vest. I carry 210 rounds of ammunition, which gives me approximately 7 sustained firefights worth of engagement capability. But I've never been in a single engagement that required more than 30 rounds to resolve, and most situations are over in fewer than 10. She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. How long does your power cell last under combat conditions? Approximately 6 hours of continuous operation, Yathara replied, her patterns shifting to less confident hues. And when that power cell is exhausted, the weapon becomes inoperative until a replacement can be installed. My weapon will function as long as I have ammunition. When I run out of ammunition, it functions as a club. When it breaks, I can repair it with basic tools and replacement parts that can be manufactured in any reasonably equipped workshop. Natasha's expression grew serious. When your weapon breaks, what happens? The question hung unanswered because they all knew what happened when advanced technology failed in remote locations. Sophisticated weapons became expensive paperweights, their complex systems requiring specialized repair facilities and replacement components that might not be available for months or years. Thanemore's scales shifted to colors that indicated grudging acceptance. Your point is taken, but surely the tactical advantages of networked weapon systems outweigh these practical considerations. Do they? Commander Voss asked, calling up the tactical analysis from the exercise. Your networked systems allowed the enemy to neutralize your entire squad's combat effectiveness with a single electronic warfare package. Cadet Volkov's independent system remained fully operational throughout the engagement. The holographic display showed their performance metrics side by side. Advanced weapon systems rendered completely ineffective, while the primitive rifle continued to engage targets with consistent accuracy. The visual representation made the tactical implications impossible to ignore. But this is a single exercise, Krexel protested, his crystalline form flickering rapidly as he processed unwelcome data. Surely such countermeasures are rare in actual combat situations. Are they? Natasha asked. What's easier, developing countermeasures for weapons that rely on complex electronic systems, or developing countermeasures for a piece of metal that throws smaller pieces of metal very fast using controlled explosions? She moved to stand beside the tactical display, her image reflected in the holographic projections of the exercise data. Electronic warfare capabilities are becoming more common across the frontier colonies. Every engagement I've participated in during the last 18 months has involved some form of technological countermeasures. Targeting jammers, power drain weapons, neural scramblers that turn your own weapon's AI against you. The assembled cadets listened in silence as she continued, their various forms of nonverbal communication painting pictures of discomfort and growing understanding. You want to know what's really primitive? Natasha's voice carried an edge that made several of the aliens unconsciously step back. Depending on technology, you can't maintain, can't repair, and can't control when it matters most. That's primitive. Commander Voss nodded slowly, his neural pathways pulsing with satisfaction. Practical wisdom often appears primitive to those who have never been forced to rely on it for survival. Theoretical sophistication is a luxury that not all environments provide. The debrief session continued for another hour with detailed analysis of tactical decisions and performance metrics, but the fundamental dynamics had shifted. Where before the discussion had focused on the apparent inadequacy of human military technology, it now centered on the unexpected advantages of systems that prioritized reliability over sophistication. As the group prepared to disperse, Zektar approached Natasha with something that might have been respect coloring his typically condescending tone. I may have misjudged your equipment choice, he admitted, his compound eyes focusing on the rifle with new interest. But I'm curious about something. You mentioned 17 colony worlds, 3 years of operations. That's extensive combat experience for someone your age. Natasha shouldered her rifle, the movement automatic and unconscious. The outer colonies don't offer much choice in the matter. You fight, or you die, or you watch other people die. She paused at the tactical center's exit, looking back at the group. Sometimes all three. What kind of operations? Yathara asked, her bioluminescent patterns showing genuine curiosity rather than the condescension that had colored their earlier interactions. For a moment, Natasha seemed to consider whether to answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat, emotional tone that military personnel often adopted when discussing things they preferred not to remember. Colony defense mostly, pirate raids, insurgent activities, wildlife management when the terraforming went wrong. The kind of problems that happen when you're trying to build civilization faster than you can support it. Wildlife management? Thalosian's serpentine lower body coiled with interest. Surely colonial security forces would handle such matters. Colonial security forces are usually about 6 people with outdated equipment and no backup within 50 light years, Natasha replied. When a terraforming project accidentally creates predators the size of shuttlecraft, you deal with the problem using whatever resources are available. The implications of that statement settled over the group like cold water. Their academy training had focused on military engagements between organized forces, tactical scenarios involving proper logistics support, and technological parity. The idea of facing existential threats with inadequate equipment and no support was outside their conceptual framework. How old were you when you started? Krexel asked, his crystalline form flickering between states as he processed the timeline implications. 15, old enough to carry a rifle, young enough to learn fast. Natasha's smile held no warmth. The colonies have practical approaches to education. She left them with that thought, her footsteps echoing down the corridor while behind her, the assembled cadets exchanged glances that spoke of assumptions being rapidly reassessed. Commander Voss remained in the tactical center, observing their reactions with the analytical interest his species brought to all social dynamics. The advanced weapons seminar took place in one of the Academy's specialized laboratories, where prototype systems were tested and evaluated before being approved for field deployment. The space hummed with contained energy and barely restrained technological sophistication, display cases showing weapons that existed at the bleeding edge of what was theoretically possible. Natasha stood before a table laden with examples of cutting-edge military hardware, while Professor Kethvar, a spindly Nexarian whose multiple arms allowed him to manipulate several devices simultaneously, provided technical explanations that bordered on incomprehensible. His species had developed most of the galaxy's current generation of personal weapons, their natural aptitude for complex engineering making them the acknowledged experts in applied destructive technology. This model represents the pinnacle of personal combat systems, Professor Kethvar was saying, his 4 arms dancing across the weapon's surface as he highlighted various features. Adaptive targeting algorithms that learn from each engagement, variable output settings from non-lethal suppression to anti-vehicle capability, and integrated battlefield networking that allows coordinated fire with other units in real time. The weapon itself was a thing of beauty in its way, sleek lines that spoke of advanced materials science, a grip that adapted to the user's hand configuration, and a targeting system that painted holographic sight pictures directly onto the user's retina. It represented centuries of technological development and refinement, the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species working toward the common goal of making warfare more efficient. Impressive, Natasha said, examining the weapon with the kind of professional interest she might have shown to an interesting museum piece. What's the mean time between failures? Professor Kethvar's primary arms paused in their demonstration, while his secondary appendages continued to manipulate control interfaces. Under optimal conditions, approximately 8,000 hours of operation between critical failures. The system is designed with multiple redundancies and self-repair capabilities. And under field conditions, perhaps 3,000 hours, depending on environmental factors and maintenance protocols. Natasha nodded thoughtfully. My rifle has approximately 40,000 rounds through it, which translates to roughly 500 hours of actual firing time over 3 years. No critical failures, minimal maintenance requirements beyond basic cleaning and lubrication. Several of the other cadets, who had been examining their own assigned prototype systems, looked up at that comparison. The numbers were stark in their implications. The most advanced personal weapon available had a failure rate more than 6 times higher than equipment that was supposedly centuries out of date. But surely, Yathara interjected, her patterns shifting to colors that indicated polite disagreement, the advanced capabilities justify the reduced reliability. This system can engage multiple targets simultaneously, adapt to changing tactical conditions, and coordinate with other networked units. Your weapon can only engage single targets. True, Natasha agreed. But how often do you actually need to engage multiple targets simultaneously? And how often does the networking capability become a liability when the enemy has electronic warfare capabilities? She moved to one of the laboratory's testing stations and activated a holographic training scenario, a simple engagement simulation involving a single hostile target at moderate range. Professor, would you mind if I demonstrated the comparative effectiveness of different approaches? Professor Kethvar's species lacked conventional facial expressions, but his posture indicated interest mixed with what might have been professional skepticism. Certainly. Please proceed. Natasha brought her rifle to her shoulder with the same fluid motion they had seen before, acquiring the holographic target through her iron sights, while the weapon's mechanical simplicity stood in stark contrast to the sophisticated systems surrounding it. The shot was clean and decisive, the holographic target registering a center mass hit that would have been immediately fatal. Target neutralized in 2.3 seconds from threat identification, the laboratory's computer announced in its neutral tone. Single projectile expended, no system malfunctions detected. Acceptable performance, Professor Kethvar acknowledged. Now, observe the capabilities of modern technology. Zektar stepped forward with one of the prototype systems, its advanced targeting computer immediately beginning threat assessment protocols while networking capabilities synchronized with the laboratory's tactical systems. The weapon's AI analyzed wind conditions that didn't exist, atmospheric density readings that were irrelevant in the controlled environment, and electromagnetic interference patterns that posed no actual threat. The engagement took 12 seconds from threat identification to target elimination, during which the weapon's sophisticated systems processed vast amounts of unnecessary data while providing targeting solutions that differed negligibly from what simple marksmanship could accomplish. Superior tactical awareness and battlefield integration, Professor Kethvar noted with satisfaction. The networked capabilities allow for coordinated engagements that would be impossible with primitive systems. Against a single target that wasn't trying to avoid being shot, Natasha pointed out. What happens when that target is moving, using cover, and actively trying to kill you while your weapon is running through its analysis protocols? The question sparked a discussion that revealed the fundamental philosophical divide between their approaches to warfare. The advanced systems were designed for scenarios where technological superiority could be brought to bear systematically, where coordination and overwhelming capability could substitute for individual skill and adaptability. They were weapons for armies that fought other armies in environments where logistics and support were available. Natasha's approach came from environments where such support didn't exist, where individual competence was the only reliable constant, and where to adapt to unexpected circumstances meant the difference between survival and death. You speak as if technology is a disadvantage, Thalosian observed, her four arms weaving patterns that indicated confusion mixed with growing interest. Surely advanced capabilities provide tactical advantages that outweigh minor increases in complexity. Do they? Natasha activated another holographic scenario, this one showing a more complex engagement involving multiple targets, civilian considerations, and environmental obstacles. Let me show you something from Kepler 438b, about 8 months ago. The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be actual combat footage, grainy, partially corrupted recordings from personal equipment that had seen hard use. The environment was clearly hostile, with atmospheric conditions that turned simple movement into a struggle against wind and debris while visibility dropped to mere meters. Pirate raid on a mining colony, Natasha explained, her voice taking on the clinical tone she used when discussing operational history. 43 civilians, including children. Raiders were using military-grade equipment similar to what we've been examining today. The footage showed figures moving through the harsh environment, their advanced weapon systems struggling to maintain targeting locks in conditions that interfered with their sophisticated sensors. Energy weapons discharged into empty air, while their targeting computers tried to compensate for atmospheric interference that changed by the second. Local security force was 6 people with equipment that had been retired from military service 10 years earlier, Natasha continued. Standard infantry weapons, basic communications gear, no networking capabilities. The engagement that followed was brief and decisive. The raiders' technological advantages proved useless in an environment that their systems couldn't adapt to quickly enough, while simple, reliable equipment continued to function exactly as designed. The security forces' inferior firepower and limited numbers were offset by their ability to engage targets their enemies couldn't even detect. 12 raiders eliminated, no civilian casualties, Natasha concluded as the footage ended. The most advanced personal weapons in the galaxy were defeated by equipment that was considered obsolete before I was born. The laboratory fell silent, except for the background hum of systems and environmental controls. Professor Kethvar's multiple arms moved in patterns that might have indicated thoughtful consideration, while the assembled cadets processed the implications of what they had witnessed. Environmental factors, Krexel said finally, his crystalline form flickering as he searched for explanations that preserved his worldview. Extreme conditions that fell outside normal operational parameters. Such situations are statistical outliers. Are they? Natasha asked. How many colony worlds exist under what you'd call normal operational parameters? How many environments across the frontier provide the kind of controlled conditions that allow advanced systems to function at their designed capabilities? She gestured toward the weapons display cases that surrounded them. These systems are marvels of engineering, but they're designed for wars that happen in databanks and tactical simulations. They assume reliable power sources, predictable environmental conditions, and enemies who fight according to established patterns. Moving to stand beside the holographic display, she continued with the kind of quiet intensity that made her audience unconsciously lean forward. Real combat doesn't provide any of those assumptions. Power fails, environments are hostile, and enemies adapt to whatever advantages you think you possess. When your sophisticated systems fail, what do you fall back on? The question hung in the air like an indictment of everything they had been taught about the supremacy of technological advancement. Advanced civilizations had built their military doctrines on the assumption that superior technology would always provide decisive advantages, but that assumption required infrastructure and support that might not exist when it mattered most. Professor Kethvar broke the silence with the kind of academic curiosity that transcended personal opinions about the superiority of his species' engineering. Tell me, Cadet Volkov, what is your opinion of current military technology development trends? Natasha considered the question carefully before answering. I think we're optimizing for the wrong problems. Every generation of weapons becomes more sophisticated, more dependent on external support, more vulnerable to disruption. We're creating systems that work perfectly under ideal conditions and fail catastrophically when those conditions don't exist. And your alternative? Systems that work adequately under any conditions and fail gracefully when they do break. She patted her rifle's receiver with unconscious affection. Weapons that can be maintained by their users, repaired with basic tools, and operated without external support indefinitely. Primitive, Zektar observed, though his tone lacked its previous condescension. Reliable, Natasha corrected. There's a difference. The mess hall during evening meal was typically a cacophony of different species, attempting to share space while consuming nutrition appropriate to their various biological requirements. Tonight, however, an unusual quiet had settled over the section where Natasha sat with her squad mates, their earlier assumptions about human military capabilities having given way to something approaching respectful curiosity. Yathara was the first to break the silence, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that indicated careful consideration of new information. The combat footage you showed us today. How many similar engagements were you involved in? Natasha looked up from her meal, which consisted of protein and carbohydrate combinations that would have been familiar to humans from centuries past. The Academy's food synthesis systems could create elaborate meals that satisfied the dietary requirements of dozens of different species, but she had learned to prefer simple, reliable nutrition over culinary sophistication. 17 major engagements, maybe 40 smaller ones. It depends on how you define the categories. She took a sip of what passed for coffee, though the synthetic compounds never quite achieved the complexity of the real thing. Pirates mostly, though we had insurgent problems on 3 worlds and wildlife issues on 2 others. Wildlife issues? Thalosian's 4 arms gestured in patterns that indicated both interest and concern. You mentioned terraforming problems earlier. Kepler 442c. The Terraforming Consortium decided they could accelerate the ecosystem development process by introducing modified predator species to control herbivore populations. The modifications were supposed to limit their reproductive potential and keep them docile toward human settlements. Natasha's expression grew distant. The modifications didn't work as designed. Krexel's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed the implications. How large were these predators? Adult specimens ranged from 2 to 4 meters at the shoulder, fast, intelligent, and completely unafraid of human technology. They seemed to understand that energy weapons had limited ammunition capacity. She paused, remembering. They would track hunting parties for days, staying just outside effective weapon range, waiting for power cells to drain. How did you deal with them? Zektar asked, his compound eyes focusing on Natasha with the kind of attention usually reserved for serious tactical discussions. Same way humans have always dealt with large predators: patient stalking, accurate shooting, and enough firepower to guarantee clean kills. She touched her rifle, which remained within arm's reach even during meals. 1 shot, 1 kill. No power cells to drain, no sophisticated systems for them to learn to avoid. The conversation continued as other cadets from different squads drifted over, drawn by discussions of actual combat experience rather than theoretical tactical scenarios. Natasha found herself at the center of an impromptu seminar on colonial warfare, her practical knowledge providing context for lessons that had previously existed only in abstract form. The thing you have to understand about the frontier colonies, she was explaining to a mixed group that included representatives from 6 different species, is that everything is improvised. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The supply chains are unreliable, and the threats change faster than doctrine can be updated to address them. A young Therlaxian cadet, whose rock-like integument made him appear far older than his actual age, raised a question about logistics support. Surely colonial governments maintain adequate military supplies for their defense forces. Colonial governments maintain whatever they can afford to ship from the core worlds at interstellar freight rates, Natasha replied. Military equipment is expensive and heavy. Food, medical supplies, and manufacturing equipment take priority. She gestured toward the sophisticated weapons that several of the cadets carried as standard Academy issue. Your plasma cannon costs more than most colonies spend on their entire security budget. The replacement power cells cost more than colonial security personnel make in a year. How sustainable is that equation? The implications of that economic reality settled over the group with uncomfortable clarity. The technological superiority that formed the foundation of modern military doctrine was predicated on industrial and economic capabilities that simply didn't exist in the frontier regions where most actual conflicts took place. So you're saying advanced weapons are useless? Asked a Vorthon cadet whose scales displayed skeptical color patterns. I'm saying they're tools designed for specific jobs, and those jobs don't include most of the conflicts that actually happen, Natasha corrected. Your plasma cannon is perfect for engaging armored vehicles or fortified positions. My rifle is perfect for engaging individual hostiles at moderate range under adverse conditions. Different tools for different problems. But surely, Yathara interjected, The trend toward technological advancement represents progress. More capable weapons, better targeting systems, improved battlefield coordination. Progress toward what goal? Natasha asked. If the goal is to fight wars between advanced civilizations with reliable infrastructure and unlimited logistic support, then yes, these systems represent progress. If the goal is to protect colonies from pirates, or deal with terraforming disasters, or maintain security in environments where the nearest support is months away, then these systems might actually be steps backward. She stood and moved to one of the mess hall's viewing ports, where the Academy's orbital position provided a panoramic view of the Nexus system's outer planets. "Look at that," she said, gesturing toward a small, dim world that hung in the distance like a forgotten afterthought. "That's Nexus 7. Population maybe 50,000, spread across 12 settlements. No industrial base, no military infrastructure, no ability to maintain sophisticated equipment." The assembled cadets followed her gaze, seeing what most of them had probably dismissed as an insignificant mining world. If pirates hit that world tomorrow, what's going to save those people? Weapons that require specialized maintenance and constant resupply, or weapons that work reliably with minimal support? The question sparked a debate that continued long after the official meal period had ended. Cadets who had never questioned the superiority of technological advancement found themselves confronting the practical limitations of systems they had assumed were objectively better than their predecessors. It was Zektar who finally asked the question that had been hanging over the entire discussion. "Your rifle, you mentioned it still had blood on it. Whose blood?" The mess hall fell silent, conversations at other tables continuing their normal volume while their section became an island of expectant quiet. Natasha's hand moved unconsciously to the weapon's receiver, her fingers tracing patterns that had become unconscious habits over years of similar contact. "Pirates," she said finally, "from the Kepler 438b raid I showed you footage from." She paused, considering how much detail to provide. The engagement didn't end when the shooting stopped. 3 of them survived the initial contact, wounded but still mobile. They had taken hostages in the colony's medical facility. Her voice took on the flat, emotional tone they had learned to recognize when she discussed operational history. Standard tactical doctrine would have been to call for specialist negotiators, establish perimeters, wait for reinforcements. The nearest reinforcements were 6 weeks away. The hostages were bleeding, and the pirates were making it clear they had nothing left to lose. "What did you do?" Krexel asked, his crystalline form flickering rapidly. What needed to be done? Natasha's reflection in the viewing port showed an expression that belonged on someone much older. Close quarters combat in a medical facility with civilian hostages. No room for energy weapons, no time for sophisticated targeting systems. Just me, this rifle, and the kind of shooting that ends problems permanently. She turned back to face the group, her gray eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "That's whose blood you see on my weapon. The last 3 pirates who thought they could terrorize civilians because no one would be willing to stop them." The silence stretched longer this time, filled with the kind of weight that comes from understanding that theoretical discussions of warfare had just intersected with its practical reality. Several of the cadets shifted uncomfortably, their various forms of nonverbal communication painting pictures of people processing information that challenged their fundamental assumptions about the nature of conflict. "How old were you?" Yathara asked, her bioluminescent patterns showing colors that indicated something between respect and concern. 17, Natasha replied, "Old enough to understand that sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones." She shouldered her rifle and prepared to leave, but paused at the edge of their group. "You asked me earlier why I carry this weapon instead of accepting something more advanced. The answer is simple. This rifle has never let me down when it mattered. It saved my life. It saved the lives of people I was responsible for protecting, and it's ended threats that would have continued hurting innocent people if someone hadn't been willing to stop them." Her hand touched the weapon's stock with unconscious affection. The bloodstains aren't something I'm proud of, but they're a reminder of what this rifle has accomplished when sophisticated systems and advanced tactics weren't available or weren't effective. They're a reminder that sometimes the most reliable solution is also the simplest one. As she walked away, the assembled cadets remained in contemplative silence, their assumptions about primitive human technology having given way to something approaching understanding. The weapon they had dismissed as obsolete had proven itself in environments and situations that their advanced systems were never designed to handle. Commander Voss appeared at the edge of their group, his neural pathways pulsing with what might have been satisfaction. "Comments on today's educational experience?" he asked in his typically neutral tone. Zektar spoke first, his mandibles clicking slowly as he formulated his thoughts. "I believe we may have misunderstood the relationship between technological advancement and practical effectiveness." "Oh?" Commander Voss's expression invited elaboration. "Her weapon isn't primitive," Thanemore added, his scales shifting to colors that indicated grudging respect. "It's optimized for different criteria than our systems: reliability instead of capability, simplicity instead of sophistication. And the implications of that optimization?" It was Yathara who provided the answer, her patterns cycling through colors that indicated uncomfortable realization. "That we've been preparing for the wrong kind of war. We've assumed that technological superiority would always provide tactical advantages, but we haven't considered scenarios where that technology becomes a liability." Commander Voss nodded slowly, his analytical mind processing their responses with obvious approval. "Tomorrow's exercise will take place in an environment with limited technological support. No network systems, no advanced targeting capabilities, no external logistics support. You'll be equipped with basic weapons and whatever skills you've managed to develop without technological assistance." The implications of that announcement settled over the group like a challenge. Their sophisticated training and advanced equipment would be useless, leaving them to rely on fundamental military skills that many of them had never needed to develop. "I suggest you spend this evening reconsidering your assumptions about the relationship between advanced technology and combat effectiveness," Commander Voss added as he prepared to leave. "Tomorrow, you'll discover whether your education has prepared you for warfare as it actually exists, rather than warfare as you've imagined it should be." As he walked away, the cadets exchanged glances that spoke of shared understanding that their comfortable assumptions about technological superiority were about to be tested against reality. In the distance, Natasha's figure disappeared around a corridor corner, her primitive rifle and ancient lessons in violence having proven more educational than years of theoretical study. The blood on her weapon told a story that none of their advanced systems could match, a story of reliability when it mattered most, of effectiveness when sophisticated alternatives had failed, and of the kind of practical wisdom that could only be learned in places where failure meant death rather than poor grades. Tomorrow, they would begin to understand what that meant.